Welcome to the Fast That I Choose. I'm John Shematek.
And I'm Lauren Welch.
Last week, our episode was about fasting from judging others and feasting on seeing the Christ in others.
And this week, we're going to talk about fasting from bitterness and feasting on forgiveness. And we're going to begin with scripture. Our scripture today, it comes from Colossians chapter 3, verses 8 and 13. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Bear with one another, and if anyone has complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord forgives you. So you must also forgive. So, John, this fasting from bitterness can be really difficult, at least for me sometimes, because I want to hold on to my resentment or my anger or whatever. If I feel that someone has hurt me or betrayed, and it's really hard to let go of that. But I know that when I do, that it's healthy for me, for one thing. My blood pressure comes down. I can. It's just healthier, and yet I find it difficult. How about you?
Yeah, I think difficult might be an understatement. When you were reading that scripture from Colossians, I thought, oh my goodness, that's quite a list of things that we have to fast from, and anger and all those things that come so naturally, to me at least, quite a lot. I, I, I think that it is very tough to do because we do, I'll speak for myself, I tend to hold on to grudges, to disappointments. When people have disappointed me or I've disappointed myself, I really will, for some reason, hold on to it, which makes no sense at all, does it? I mean, really, uh, we hold on to these things, and just like you said, they're destructive to us. If we do that and turn our anger inward, turn our bitterness inward, it's not good for our physical health, our emotional health, or our spiritual health. It's just bad, bad. Yet we do. And I wonder why that is. Why is it so difficult to fast from or let go of those kinds of emotions? What do, I don't know the answer to that.
Sometimes I think anger can make me feel powerful, and so I would feel that I'm losing something if I give in. And I don't think that's what it's about, but I think it's an emotion, and I hold on to emotion.
That makes a lot of sense to me, Lauren. And I was thinking about this. You and I have spoken a lot over this past year about the grief process. And when you hear that about anger and bitterness, anger is such a overwhelming part of grief. And you and I have spoken a lot about the situation that we're in right now, even if things are starting to look a little brighter as far as the pandemic's concerned. That has really overshadowed so much this past year. And I think that so many of us, or I'll speak for myself again, I have been in a state of profound grief, just uh, thinking about all the things I've lost
Mm-hmm.
and all the relationships that feel so distorted right now. And so I think it's very easy and almost natural to become angry whenever you experience loss. And bitterness to me is something that it's like anger that won't go away.
Right.
Anger, sometimes I think of my Italian roots, and my blood will boil at times. I'm like, oh, and just kind of let it loose. And that's one thing. But to maintain and hold on to anger and become bitter, that's really something that is not healthy.
It's not, and the people, and I've known people who have held on to it for years, and they become very, they're not happy people. They're not happy people at all. You know, I was reading the other day, Nelson Mandela. He had been in prison. He was in prison for 30 years, um, and he could have come out and been a very bitter man, and he said so. But he said that he didn't want to hold on to bitterness because he wanted to transform. He wanted transformation to happen. And as long as we're holding on, that really struck me. As long as we
Mm,
want to hold on to something that is not good for us, we can't transform. We can't change. We can't transform. We have to let it go to see what will happen. We have to let it go so that something else can take its place. This is the fast that I choose. We have to choose to let go of that bitterness. To me, sounds like something that is eating away at me, that is very sour, that is very ugly. I have to choose to let that go so that something else can come in.
yeah, and it just the way you put that about it, something that is eating away inside, reminds me of the other kind of the aspect of bitterness and anger is that those kinds of things actually are life shortening. I mean, they make you
Mhm.
miserable. Yes, during your life, you just are having a much more miserable time of, but your life is shorter. Your physical life is shorter, and it's really it's kind of tragic that that's the case. So this is, I'm sure, I'm guessing that people out there, anyone who's watching this, probably can think of something that they are angry or about or have very recently been angry about.
If we want to be healthy, if we want to healthy in not just body but in mind and spirit, if we want to be whole, we it's important to let go. That's probably why Jesus told Peter he needed to forgive. When Peter asked Jesus if he needed to forgive only 7 times, Jesus said no, 70 times seven. You know, over and over and over again of letting go. Um,
So it's from what I'm hearing you say is that letting go of the anger, letting go of the bitterness makes it possible to forgive.
yes, I would say that.
Yeah.
Because I think forgiveness is a process. I don't think it happens. I don't think if somebody hurt someone I loved that I could forgive them that day, probably that year. But I can want to forgive, and I can ask God to help me to forgive, and I can talk with friends or a counselor. And in that process, I think we learn to forgive.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm thinking about a uh, an episode in my own life where I had was harboring some really bad feelings about someone for an injustice that they had committed against me and my family, and that just went on and on and on for well, I would say, I'd say for months, and finally, at some point, it wasn't a flash of lightning, like you say, that's not how it happens. But at some point, there was some decision at the level of the heart, I think, that I needed to let that go and actually wouldn't need to say in so many words because there was no way I could speak to this individual. We were totally out of, there was no way to communicate or contact each other. But at least from my heart, I could forgive that person.
Mhm.
And I could say it to myself, I am forgiving. And what was amazing to me is that at that time, even though it took a long, long time, a process, like you say, to get there, when I finally reached there, I felt like the world was lifted off my shoulder. The weight
Mhm.
of the world was, and just all the tension and anxiety about so many other things disappeared, so, or bitter
Oh,
about.
yes. Yeah, if I watch the news, most of the time I get angry. And I have to do something about. I do have to let that go. If I don't, you're right. I mean, it's not going to do me any good to hold on to it. But yeah, there's lots of things that injustice makes me angry. People who lie, people who don't tell me the truth, people who keep things from me. When you know, yeah, I get angry, but I also have to learn. I have to learn and have learned that eventually, I believe that prayer and asking God for for help is the only way. I know it's the only way that I have been able to let go of some of the anger in my life.
And kind of begin to move back into relationship. It may not be perfect, but our
Right.
relationship with the divine one becomes better when we start forgiving, when we are just kind of letting go of the anger and beginning to feast on forgiveness. Who would ever think of forgiveness as something you would feast on?
That's not the first thing that comes to my mind when when I get angry at someone. That's not the first thing that comes to my mind is that I should forgive them. It's usually that I want to wring their neck. But
But you don't, thank goodness, for
I
you
have
and for
not
them.
yet. I
Not
have
yet.
not done that yet.
One of the things that you and I do as we're preparing for these sessions is to take a look at some images. And I like to review my own photos that I've taken over the years. So this is an image taken in a vineyard, which I love because the vineyard is such a symbol in the scriptures that Jesus uses it all. I mean, how many stories do you tell about vineyards? Tons. And there's a good reason for it. But what I love about this one is those grapes. And those grapes to me as a symbol of feast. I'll tell you, when I walked through that vineyard after I took the picture, I couldn't help myself. I just had to reach and pluck one of those beautiful grapes, and it was ready, it was sweet, it was ripe. And I thought, if this is what forgiveness tastes like, I need to do more forgiveness in my life.
Mm.
You know what? I think this brings us to a close of this session. And if you would please, as is our custom, Lauren, uh, read that wonderful passage from Micah to leave with people for the next week.
Micah 6, chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
That says it all. Yeah. So thank you, Lauren, for being virtually with me again, and thanks to everyone out there. And we'll see you next time. So